Laptop right here. I'm gonna pull up the stream.
How about now?
Hold on. Laptop right here. Oh, we have sound now.
Okay.
All right.
That's right
Thank you.
there.
Wonderful. All right, from the top.
And again.
So we just finished our rehearsal. We have sound now. I'm gonna mute this. Okay.
Go away.
Dude. We fixed it. Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first ever Bulls Night after party. I am your host, Garrett Hicks, aka Pastor Mike. It wasn't funny the first time I said it, nor was it this time, so bear with me. And tonight I'm joined by Carly Bossi, our campus minister, and Father Justin Paskert, our director here at the Catholic Student Center at USF. And so, like I said, this is our first show, so Bulls Night After Party, basically the idea of what we're doing here is to have kind of like a sit-down discussion with the community. Even though, we can't all be here together, we have our social distancing going on, as you can see. And so whatever is on your heart and on your mind, just bringing it to a discussion. And so we're streaming on Facebook, Vimeo, and YouTube currently. And so anybody who's watching can leave a comment or a question, and I will be monitoring that as we go through the discussion and bringing up your questions to Father Justin and Carly for us to talk about it. Because I know we always have a lot of questions going on just throughout the week, or especially after a Bulls Night, and we're always bugging these two to get some wisdom. And so we want to provide you with that opportunity to, bug them a little bit more, even virtually. And so thank you for joining us, and feel free to leave any questions. And so it begins. And today being April 2nd, it is the birthday of our bishop. So we just want to start by wishing Bishop Parks a big happy birthday from us.
Happy birthday, Bishop. Many blessings.
Happy birthday, Bishop.
And so our topic that we had talked about at Bulls Night this week, and I'm sure this is on the bishop's mind plenty. I do not envy him right now, is kind of entering into this space and figuring out what it means to be a faith community online. Like we had said, kind of having this placed in your lap and saying, good luck, here, turn everything upside down, reinvent the wheel, whatever you want to call it. But
yeah, there's not like books or anything like out there, or any other examples that you could follow of just like how to go through what we've just been going through for the past 2 weeks.
Yeah. And also certainly, like, technology is something that we've heard talked about a lot. It's like moving into the field of technology to branch out, but this isn't something that a lot of people weren't preparing for. Kind of like, okay,
right.
Well, we're going to go ahead and proactively start moving everything online as well. And so this is something that's like totally, a lot of people are completely unprepared for.
Right. I think too is like when I started seeing that this is going to happen, that we're going to get to a point where we're not going to have public masses. When that, the masses will continue. Like there's been times in history where we've not been able to have public masses, but wherever there's a priest, well, mass is being said, so that those masses are still happening. But the ability for the whole community to gather together to pray at those, is something we're not able to do right now. So as soon as I started thinking about that, it would be, okay, well, what can we do? And just from the desires of my own heart, it's just like, well, I would like it to be kind of as normal as possible. So as soon as I started moving in that direction, I was like, okay, well, what would it take if we started like live streaming the Mass in the chapel, as opposed to like, well, I could set up an altar in my office and do it in here, and it'd kind of make it a little easier, simplify it. But nobody's ever gone to Mass in my office or over in the rectory or, various places. And then at the same time, well, I could do it at a more convenient time, but it's like, okay, well, 12:10 is when we always do it, so let's just like everything's already getting turned over, so let's keep some of those spiritual things that we do together as consistent as we can. So it's like trying to not change all of those things, and so just trying to set those things up. And that I think for myself is like the importance of trying to stay in a rhythm of prayer is huge. It's like here's the way that I've been doing things. It's like my routine for getting up in the morning, the things that I plan to do in a day, then how I end my day. And so how prayer is just kind of a normal thing that I've been doing through all of that. Well, suddenly, like, now my whole routine's different. What I used to do, my schedule is just not there anymore. So, like, now I'm trying to reestablish my whole kind of normal prayer routine. And so as we're able to offer the live stream Mass, well, like, okay, well, if that's already been part of the routine, let's not just reinvent all of the schedule, trying to keep some things as consistent as possible.
Yeah. I think definitely keeping it in the chapel brings a sense of normalcy and allows people the opportunity to enter in a little bit better because it's something they're already familiar with. So having the space be the same is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I mean, especially when this is part of your routine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's something you're used to, but it's also, a recurring thing for you. Just being taken out of your routine, the more that you're out of it, it's just, like, distressing.
Mm-hmm.
But, how, this is just something I'm curious about, but that first day that you did live stream daily Mass, that's something, like you said, there's no book preparing you, there's no real way to kind of prepare for that experience before you get up there. What was that like, feeling that, just like doing it for the first time?
So I've celebrated Mass with nobody there or one person there before, say I'm traveling or something like that, so like that wasn't necessarily all that different. Even it's like my first daily Mass here. That's a moment like I don't think I'm ever going to forget. It's like this was a normal day. Mass was at 5:15 at that time, and like anybody could come to Mass, and there was one person at daily Mass, and it just came from a fairly large parish where there would be it's like 20-30 people at daily Mass, and then like, I get to my new assignment and I show up here and it's like there's literally nobody, and then just before Mass started, one person showed up. It's like it brought up a lot of those memories back, because I don't think anybody goes through seminary and like feeling this conviction of the Lord and moved by the Spirit, like I want to give my life to the church and serve people, most especially in parish ministry, as diocesan priests do, and think, wouldn't it be great if I just like had the chapel to myself and nobody was there and was all alone? It's like this is the exact opposite of everything any priest has ever desired for his ministry. And so, it's like being up there, it felt very like a little spirit of discouragement, feeling defeated, and it was like, okay, well, we're live streaming, but it's like, this is not, I suppose it's better than nothing, but it's really not what I want it to be.
Yeah, and kind of, since you said you're a little bit of that from the past coming back, but when you first experienced that, when you came here, that first daily Mass, were there any fruits that you got, like, coming out of that experience that you've been able to apply
from
now?
Like what I learned there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, certainly that I would say in that time I had a lot of confidence as like the Spirit's going to do something here, in that kind of my own spiritual journey with this ministry is I've asked the Father for every orphan student over on this campus, and there's thousands of them. You know, that there's a lot of spiritually lost people, and so I asked him for them, and he said he would give them to me. So I mean, if the Father said that, like, I can trust in it. You know, and I feel like I relate to Abraham a lot right now. It's like, okay, I'm going to have children, like, but my wife's getting older, I'm getting older, like, when's this going to start happening? You know, and that, like, he never sees the promised land. You know, but that this is a faithfulness of the Father through all of this. You know, and I think he's definitely been showing up a lot. That there's been a lot of moments of grace through all this.
Yeah. So I would say, like, it was very obviously a weird experience for all of us, but from my perspective, it has been comforting to know that this is a situation that we're all going through together. I think it would be much more difficult for me if I was experiencing something like what you experienced at that first daily mass, you know, having one person come up and, like, this is something that's been entrusted to you, sort of thing. I think it would be a lot easier for me to get anxious about it, as opposed to knowing, like, okay, we don't necessarily have any power over this, and we all have been set back to the same point. You know, the same effects are being put upon us, and, like, certainly seeing all of the things that have come out of it has also been, like, greatly comforting to me. I have a habit, I don't know if it's good or bad, of kind of convincing myself that there isn't a problem. It's probably bad more often than good, but in this situation, it's like, okay, all of this is going on, I'm just gonna, like, focus on the good, and, like, not just be like, oh, you know, it's whatever, and then, you know, all of a sudden things are starting to move again, and it's a lot easier to stay out of discouragement.
Yeah.
You know? But for you, how has it been, like, just doing your everyday job?
Yeah, it's definitely been weird. Everything has moved online. So that means, like, all of our training groups for small group leaders that are going to lead on campus when they get back, that's online. Every one-on-one meeting that I have with students, it's online. So we've been FaceTiming and working with our Wi-Fi here, which is a little spotty sometimes. And so I got kicked out of my meeting a couple of times yesterday, which was fun. But when I got back onto the meeting, everyone was just chatting with each other, and it was really cool to, like, just step in and, like, oh, this is just like what would happen if I came in late to a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that was encouraging for me. I think to see this place where our students loved to be, loved to relate to one another, still being able to happen, even if it is virtually. And one thing that I was kind of a little bit discouraged about was, look at all of our students who have found community here, who are now, like, community, having to leave this place that they've called home, this place where they've found the Lord. And so going into my first meeting with these students, I was ready to hear, like, oh, you know, it's been really hard. Like, I don't know how to live my Christian life back at home. But what I was met with was, yeah, my family and I, like, we've been praying together. I'm really loving being with my little brother again. I'm able to, like, show my family the love of Christ that I wasn't necessarily able to show before. So, like, being able to have equipped them well enough in advance is a really wonderful testament to, I think, the good work that the Lord is doing here. So that's been pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. You get a little affirmation that making a difference. Because, I mean, that also ties into the theme
Mm-hmm.
for the year with, you know, second act.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, okay, here's this life-changing event, and now you get to choose how you react. You know, you're going to choose your second act. Are you going to utilize those gifts that you've been given, or are you going to sort of squander them? And so, except where we would normally, I think, expect to talk about something like this and then kind of say, okay, that sounds cool in theory, you know, we can talk about it, we can ponder on what it means to have fortitude, but actually being forced to make that decision and go for it. That's the part that will catch you by surprise.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, you have a list full of firsts.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, that's comforting too. Just seeing that truly, like, necessity being the mother of invention.
Yeah. Something I find very neat is, you know, so much we would talk about, like, oh, Catholic Church needs to kind of catch up and get our presence in the kind of the wider community through new means of communication. It's like we're kind of lagged behind, and in some ways it's like, well, we have these buildings, like, we're the Catholic Church, you should know we're here, and like if you want to find us, you know where to find us, and you know, in that, like, websites and streaming and like the amount of parishes streaming their mass when this all started was 3. You know, and it was the newly remodeled cathedral so that they could do the bishop's liturgies, and they would only do those on, like, big events. And then 2 parishes in Pinellas County, and it's just like, okay, you know, that's and it's like, okay, is there really a need for that? And suddenly, okay, there's a need for it, and now, you know, it's like, I would say maybe a third of our parishes have in the past 2 weeks gotten live streaming up and running as a way to still stay connected with their communities. It's like no letter from the bishop would have made that happen so fast. You know, it's like for us to actually move and start making these things happen. You know, it's like that necessity just kind of dictated it. I was also very edified. I read one of the articles is YouTube and, like, Netflix and other streaming services had to dumb down their signal because it's just the amount of bandwidth being used on the internet. And it's like, I hope we were just like a little part of that. It was just like, Netflix just doesn't work as well because we elbowed our way into the internet and are taking up a little bit of space. And
we're claiming the space.
Yeah, we were claiming the space.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Catholic Church showed up on the internet and Netflix slowed down, you
Yeah.
know? I'm okay with that.
That's pretty good.
We will survive every empire, every kingdom, including Netflix. I have faith in this.
Yeah.
We've done it before. If we can live through Rome, we can live through Netflix.
There will be a time when Netflix is not. Catholic Church will still be here.
There it is.
Yeah. Blockbuster.
Ooh. Netflix is going there.
Another empire in the dust, yeah.
Yeah. Now, also something kind of touching on that, sort of like that resilience, you know, we hear a lot about, of course, this is always going to happen, but like this sort of generational thing, you know, people talking about how we're not the same, you know, Americans as they are now. And people a lot of times like to point to, you know, a generation like the Greatest Generation, or the Americans who lived through the Depression, and point to them and see like how they adapted to something. And we kind of use them as a landmark of American ingenuity and resilience. And I think a lot of people were convinced that we couldn't do that again, that we were softened to a point where if we were met with something like this, that we wouldn't find a way to get around it. And I think the fact that we've been, you know, showing that that's not the case is a little bit comforting, because like I'm not gonna lie, I've had those thoughts, those doubts before too. It's like, okay, could my generation make it through, you know, a Great Depression or something like that? And so, you know, certainly this might not be we'll find out. It might not be on the same scale as something like one of those events, but
Yeah.
it's a chance to prove ourselves more or less.
Yeah.
All right, do we want to get into some questions?
Let's go.
That's what we're here for.
Okay. Alrighty, so our first question pertaining to this topic is, as Catholics, during times like this, are there ways for us to receive communion?
Do we get to know like who say these things, or is there just going to be anonymous?
So if there's a name attached to them, then yes, but this one doesn't have a name attached to it.
Is there a way to receive communion during this time?
Yes.
So, I would say in general, the first priority is always for the dying, so that like the priests will put themselves in the harm's way to make sure the dying have access to the full sacraments. Unless kind of bishop gives me some direction of like how to do this in a reverential way for the Blessed Sacrament and a safe way for kind of our current policies as a culture enforced. I don't know how that would be possible, but certainly like the sacraments will not be deprived from anybody who needs them at the hour of death.
And so, kind of going off from that, I think it might be useful to touch a little bit on like spiritual communion and like the Eucharist in general, like experiencing the mystery.
Yeah. How to stay connected to the Eucharist when we can't physically receive it. Are you unaware, my brothers and sisters, that you are the body of Christ? It's the Holy Spirit that makes us the church. That mystery present in the Blessed Sacrament that we celebrate when we gather together as the church. So that this mystery of me who have already received the body of Christ, that the Eucharist is already at work in me. Like I've received my first communion. So that it's not necessarily Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament isn't a volume issue. As in, I need a sufficient volume in me at any given time to be able to receive grace. So like that I'm united to the Eucharist is celebrated in the act of physically receiving it, but spiritually it's always present. So that being true, well, then standing on my identity as being united to Christ in the sacrament, the source and summit of our faith. Like yes, there's a time of suffering. I think the best image for this is the one that the mystics would always go to, which is the encounter between Christ the bridegroom and his bride the church. Like we're talking about a nuptial mystery of like when the couple comes together physically, right? So spiritually, a couple would be married all the time, but then the opportunities to celebrate that spiritual mystery physically through the nuptial act. Right? Like for couples, there's times where they're abstaining, that this is going to be a time for us to be abstaining from the bridegroom. Right? But that we're spiritually still as intimately connected to him as ever. And that in some ways is through this act of obedience, it's going to bear fruit. And my greatest desire is like people will never take the Eucharist for granted again. It's one idea of thinking of like, oh, okay, well, if you go to the middle of the Amazon, you might have trouble having access to the sacraments. Well, like, who would have thought, in 2020 in Tampa, you'd have trouble having access to the sacraments, but that every time we're able to encounter Christ in this way of communion, it's super special. So as part of our live stream, we pray a little prayer of spiritual act of communion. That actually comes from St. Padre Pio. And so just kind of this is a prayer that we can pray at any time because we're always connected to the mystery of the Eucharist. So it's not just like, oh, well, I watched a live stream Mass. So it's like I could pray that prayer before going to bed. I could pray it when I wake up. I could pray it at meal times. Like this desire, this longing for the Eucharist is really, I think, a way of entering deeper into our spiritual hunger for this food that only Christ can give us.
And I was doing a little bit of research on that prayer, and it was born out of the desire of St. Padre Pio for the Eucharist. And so when we pray that prayer, we're like uniting our own desire, with Jesus, who we are spiritually receiving. And there's one part of it that I love, I embrace you as if you were already there. Like, I embrace you into my heart as if you were already there, working within me. So I love that you brought that up, that is like Christ the bridegroom is already within us, because we are his bride, the church.
Yeah. And Padre Pio is a priest. Like, he could celebrate Mass, and he still has a longing for the Eucharist.
Yeah, like this growing up with the communication that we've been afforded, the sort of instant gratification of being able to reach out to any loved one or friend at any time, and also having, such, availability of the sacraments too, certainly being blessed with that opportunity. I think we've gotten used to that. And so even like before this, that's kind of been the attitude that a lot of people have, especially younger people, something along the lines of, well, you're talking about a married couple abstaining, or even just friends not being able to see each other or talk to each other for a while. It's kind of a lost concept that, there was a time when people, once you were separated, let's say you go somewhere or you go to war or you move across the country, you might not be able to see or talk to that person for a very long time, and you just have to trust in that relationship, and know that something as strong as the choosing of love is not something that just goes away because of a circumstance, and so that being something that we have kind of, I think, lost sight of, makes it much more difficult to deal with something like this, because you can look through history at all these times when it's happened before, where the church and is kind of, the sacraments are taken away from us. But yeah, that's also a time where perhaps something like that was more common, and the sacraments to begin with weren't as much of a guarantee for those people, or they were much more used to separation and just the integrity of trust with just interpersonal relationships. So I think as much as we have the tools and technology to overcome it, as great as that is compared to the past, we also have to overcome sort of the deficit that we have already put ourselves in because of the same technology. So we mentioned the Greatest Generation, and now people all want to talk about the 40s. So fireside chat. Yeah.
That's basically what we're doing here.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
That's funny.
We conveniently framed it so that you can't see Father Justin's wheelchair. It's just like FDR's, like we have to hide him, but we're I'm kidding.
Need a little blanket over him.
There's no polio. He can walk. So I'm just. This is the part where like I'm getting comfortable now, and so I just start saying the stupid things that I normally say.
All right, Pastor Mike.
Pastor Mike is coming. I can just blame it on Pastor Mike, right? I didn't get my arm tattoo. I thought maybe that was a little too much. The earrings.
Your earrings in too.
Yeah, once we get in the swing of things, maybe Pastor Mike can come out. So here we have. Here's a question. So for all of us to answer. Favorite spiritual reading?
Oof.
It's good to know in a time like this.
Mm-hmm. So definitely the Reed of God. I see it. It's right there. Yes, the Reed of God is my favorite spiritual reading. It was suggested to me by a priest and it is super wonderful. I talk about it a lot. It is a book by Carol Hauslander, and it is a collection of her essays on Mary, and just reflecting on Mary, the woman who gave birth to our Savior, who was also a human. So like it kind of brings a human aspect to this this kind of sometimes lofty idea of who they were. It brings it a little bit more down to earth so we can understand what that maybe looked like. And it is just a wonderful experience of getting to read this holy woman's experience of a reflection on Mary and her son. I highly recommend it. It has changed my life.
So who's that priest that recommended it to?
I don't know. It might be right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm using the wrong literary term when I say this, but the analogy and like the description of and the explaining of the reed analogy itself is a very I don't know, like almost poetic thing in that book.
Absolutely.
Which is very easy to appreciate.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
All right, so I'm going to recommend Father Timothy Gallagher's Discernment of Spirits here. This is very dog-eared because it's been lent to a lot of people. You might have thought I was going to say the Confessions, but that's definitely true too. But I think this is, as far as one that like really changed my prayer, it would have to be Father Timothy Gallagher. And I'll give a plug for his podcast, Discerning Hearts. And so he has a very soothing voice, but he is an expert in teaching the rules of St. Ignatius and Ignatian prayer and stuff like that. So, highly recommend.
It's a great podcast to fall asleep to.
Yes. He has a voice that will put you to sleep.
It's true.
Remind us
In a
of the name
nice,
for that podcast.
Peaceful state. Discerning Hearts.
Discerning Hearts.
Yes, Father Timothy Gallagher. He has some nice reflections on Lord of the Rings too. They're quite good. Yeah.
As a side note, the Live for Ejection podcast won't put you to sleep. Not at all. That's a stay awake one, right?
Haven't since we've started live streaming. I haven't like recorded it to upload stuff on there. So.
Yeah.
I mean, they're already recorded, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just on a different format.
So you can't see it, but there is an entire wall of books over here in Father Justin's extensive library, Bibles in every different language. He's just flexing on us with all these different dictionaries and Bibles, but I'm not as much of a reading buff. So I'm trying to get into the habit more now, and so I have a long list of things, including the Ignatian discernment and everything. So I have a lot of things that I've been diving into lately. So I'm currently reading the Confessions. Also, I'm an extremely slow reader, and so something like even the Confessions, which isn't a very large book, but has a bit of more dense text in it. That's something that I'm really taking my time with, and I'm really, really enjoying. Just kind of going through and having never read an extensive prayer, right, like a book that's written in the form of a prayer, that in itself, experiencing it for the first time has been extremely fruitful. Also just being able to relate to it, because St. Augustine being a very relatable person for pretty much any broken human makes it very good to go through, and like as you've said, something to revisit as you go through life, being that also this is something that tracks Augustine's lifelong journey. You can kind of look and see yourself in each of these different books or chapters, and so I've been doing that. I'm also, as far as reading went, I was always more into reading poetry and stuff like that, and theater, as opposed to reading big books like Tolkien and stuff like that. And so after, I remember when I was in high school, we watched a movie about, I think it's called Carol. It's a biographical film about JP2. Very good movie. Do you have a copy of that too? He's got a copy of everything.
There it is.
Carol. Yeah. If you haven't seen it, this is just too much. If you haven't seen Carol, I would highly recommend it. Very good film. It's not, I don't want to be judgmental here, but a lot of religious movies, sometimes people perceive them as being a little bit, they're a little bit cheesy sometimes, but Carol is like a good, very high quality, well made film, with like a lot of attention to like the craft of it, as well as careful attention to his personal life story. And so when I watched that film in high school, it kind of explains how Carol was introduced to St. John of the Cross, and him being at the time, Carol being very much like an actor. St. John of the Cross was something that he could kind of hold on to and really like dive into his faith with. So
John of the Cross is an artist, poet, and
so me being a little bit younger and kind of trying to relate to JP2 a little bit, I started reading a little bit of that. So like Dark Night of the Soul is something that has stuck with me for several years now, and just being such an excellent piece of poetry in general by itself, but also like a beautiful look into the relationship with a person and Christ, similar to Augustine's Confessions, really, but in a poetic sense. Yeah. And so we had another question, which I guess you could kind of say is a part 2 of this, but picking one, let me read the exact wording here. So pick one religious figure that each of you most resonate with, not necessarily your favorite, but somebody that you relate to the most. I can start if you guys want to think about it for a second. I find myself, I relate to a lot of people who mess up, so I could list like 20 names right now, but the first one that comes to mind is Jonah, because I've spent so much time thinking about discernment and learning how to discern.
And getting on ships going the wrong direction.
Yeah, exactly. Coming to Father Justin and asking him, how do I navigate this, and learning about the discernment of spirits a little bit, and trying to read and figure out what's going on in my heart and how to act upon it, and then just completely ignoring all of that at times. I try not to be like crazy impatient or anything, but it's more so, and maybe I am a little bit better at this now that I understand discernment well, but definitely over the past 5 years, I would say, I've been Jonah so many times, being told, hey, you're going here, and say, okay, we're going to Nineveh, all right, opposite direction. And then just like having this idea that's like, oh, God can't see me, if I hide in the ship, it's like, he's just gonna forget. He's gonna deal with the other messy, broken people, and he'll just,
somebody else will do it, I'm sure.
Yeah. So Jonah,
nice,
and company, all those others.
I mean, I have St. Peter there, St. Francis here. I mean, they're definitely 2 of my go-tos. But I'd like to talk about St. Pope John Paul II, because today's the anniversary of his death. And so 15 years ago, this was also a instrumental moment of my discernment to the seminary. So it's like, as far as like a direct impact that he had. So I don't know if you recall, but a mere 2 days ago was March 31st, which is the day Terry Schiavo died. Which actually just had a book right here. There's a book on her. And another book on her. And another book on her. But they were, like, those two deaths, like, so close together. And a lot of, like, where I was spiritually at the time, praying through that, was, like, how utterly necessary Christ is to everything. And just, like, the wonderful example of who he was. It's like that he was an admirable man. Like, that was well known before he died. And in this, like, the last part of his years, his Parkinson's, and, like, how much suffering he was going through with that, and that kind of the what is life about, the most important things for what's worth living for, stuff like that. So a lot of those questions is like that the roots of my faith had to go much deeper, and that Terry Schiavo and Pope John Paul II were two huge catalysts the Lord used for that.
For me, she's not named, but the little girl in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. The first time I heard that gospel, I was a senior in college, and I put Talitha Koum, that's what that pastor's from. I put Talitha Koum on my cap, which was a good experience for me. Father Justin doesn't like it when you put things on your cap, so just put that out there.
At least it wasn't a tattoo.
It wasn't a tattoo, so there you go.
It's very temporary.
I still have that cap, so not as temporary.
It's on Instagram.
It is. That's what matters.
Do it for the gram.
Do it for the gram, exactly. But when I first heard that gospel, it really struck me because I was like, why do I feel like I relate to this so much? And it just goes back to, like, my testimony of, like, how the Lord had entered into my life, and I really felt like that little girl who was dead, and, like, I was just, my spiritual life was dead. I did not know how to receive the love of the Lord, but it says Jesus took the little girl by the hand and said to her, Talitha Koum, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And when I heard those words, I was like, the Lord has spoken those words to me in my heart. And then after she rose, she walked around, and Jesus said to her, Jesus said to the people in the room that she should be given something to eat. So he raises her, and then he sustains her through it all. And when I heard that, there was just this overwhelming sense of, like, the Lord has always been with me, but he has raised me in so many beautiful ways, and he has continued to sustain me. He didn't just raise me to leave me. He raised me to continue to love me through all of that. So, the little girl from Mark.
Nice. Also, I find, like, reading the Confessions constantly relating to Augustine.
Yeah.
I forget which, I think it's in book 3 or 2 when he's talking about his youth and stealing the pear.
The pear.
Right. And kind of this idea. And then also when he goes to talk about the theater, right? About entertainment and how like, this is something that I can definitely relate to. Seeking out this play of tragedy and misery so that he can experience pain in some way as, like, this catharsis of commiserating with somebody who's fictitious, but also at the same time being completely blind to the misery of his own state.
Yeah.
And that goes into everything of we had talked about, like, how he feels about fiction in general, but specifically, like, that kind of, I think for me it's a lot of, or it's taken the form of, like, I feel bad for myself, or I'm feeling pity, and so I'm going to seek out this opportunity to like channel that through media.
Yeah. It's really just like being dead inside and then doing something so that you feel something again.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. And if you just kind of like aggravate that instead of seeking out something that's going to lift you out of it a little bit, it's something that you can just kind of sustain. So we have another question regarding the Mass. So this one would be, I guess, this is something that probably everybody could kind of pitch in on, but our thoughts on the idea or the belief that the church should perhaps fight harder to continue supplying or offering the sacraments. Maybe people who feel that the church perhaps like gave up, or that the church is reinforcing the idea that going to the Mass physically is not necessary by kind of bending to all of this.
It's a little hard to speak to because like the ability to make those decisions, right? So like you're talking about an exercise of authority by our bishops, and that they have been entrusted with the care of our souls in the ministry of the sacraments and like the mysteries of God entrusted to their power. A tremendous power and a tremendous responsibility, and that those decisions are theirs alone. And so we have an intrinsic inability to see things from their perspective, right? That at the end of the day, our bishop is meant to be the one who gathers these things together to hear from us. And I feel absolutely certain our bishop is hearing the cry of the poor. And I could not imagine how much he's hurting, knowing that this is his weight to bear. And that's not something any bishop's going to do lightly. You know, just like no priest gets ordained because they want to do ministry to an empty church. Like no bishop wants to make decisions like that. And so trusting in the heart of our bishops and their exercise of their responsibilities, I think we need to put that squarely in their hands, right? The anger, the frustration, the not seeing it, the not understanding, perfectly understand. But in some ways, it's like that's the stuff we have that we're carrying around that we got to work through, and that this isn't the authority of the church.
Did you unmute your computer?
It is muted.
We're having some audio issue,
Is anything?
and our technician is actively working on it.
Yeah. Is anything playing through the computer?
For some reason, at some point, it started being just two of you voice with like a significant delay.
I don't know, it might have been buffering or something.
It just said we're having some audio issues.
Is it repeating?
Yeah. I don't know how to fix this.
I don't know. That was my stomach.
I wonder if that got picked up. I thought it was going to be me.
Do you
I thought it was-
know what maybe is how to troubleshoot this?
If it's a latency problem, it might just need a moment to catch up.
Yeah.
And that if there's not a setting that changed, then
I didn't touch anything.
it shouldn't. The other thing we could probably do is like stop and restart it.
Do you want me to try that?
Not really. Is it persisting?
It's getting it's closing the gap a little bit. It's still. It just said if there's not a setting that changed, so it's like a solid 30-second delay.
Interesting. But is that showing up on people's receiving end?
Let me see. I will find out right now.
Any comments on that? Because the video and the audio might have a disconnect.
It looks like there's a delay for the video and audio on the videos.
But if they're still synchronized, we'll be okay. But is that showing up on
The delay is
people's
different.
receiving?
There's less of a delay for the video than for the
Any
audio.
comments? So they're not synchronized.
Mm.
Well, but if the audio's still going,
Santiago says to check if there are 2 videos.
is the video and the audio?
Also, Paul wanted to know if we were going to sing to the bishop for his birthday.
Take it away, Carly.
Is that happening right now during our audio delay?
I mean,
Audio
we can test our audio with it.
Okay. Are you guys joining me?
No.
Garrett?
Sure.
Yes.
I'm gonna go look at the computer
Okay.
while you do that.
Alright, ready?
Intermission time. Happy
Intermission.
birthday, Bishop.
Happy birthday, Bishop. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Bishop Parks. Happy birthday to you.
Hey. And many more.
It's gonna be like singing in rounds.
Oh,
Oh,
that's nice.
It'll be like a chorus.
That works well for happy
It'll
birthday.
be a natural little reverb.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, look.
Oh, that's so fun.
This is just totally not
It's- yeah.
lined up with the video.
But I'm only hearing one audio track on there. It's still not
Mhm.
synced for that.
Yeah.
Two.
Well,
Interesting.
I mean, we could just keep chatting while you're working. Like Father Justin was saying about, trusting the decision of the bishops.
Mhm.
I find that in general, this has been, of course, an exercise in trust in the Lord,
Absolutely.
but just in general, an exercise of trusting authority. Like, we have to listen to, we have a government in place that has to make certain calls about how to keep people safe, and the bishops as well, and then are, going down and all the way to a family, parents have to, kind of decide how their family is going to go through this. And so I always kind of think of the idea, or I guess the saying of like, I don't need you to understand my decision, but I need you to respect it, like that kind of thing. And so that's very difficult for a lot of us to
accept.
to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to think of that as like the screaming child who doesn't want to go to mass. It's like, but like this is good for you, or like the screaming child who doesn't want to like eat his vegetables. It's like these things are necessary. Vegetables, yes. These things are necessary, and this is what's good for you, and like I know what's best, and like you don't have the understanding right now to know this, but like I'm doing this because I love you. And I think that's what our bishops are doing. Like they're doing this because they love their flock, they love the people that they're caring for.
Yeah.
And the Father loves us too, and he will bring us through it.
Yeah. And then also, like, personally, having been in that situation of like rebelling, pushing against
I think it's just gonna be rebooted.
A
if it's
choice.
gonna do it. But how's it coming through the stream?
it's coming through. It's the delays there, so it's not, the audio and the video is not lined up.
I'd say we just finish it as it is.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
But I know personally, always, whenever I've been in that situation, I always feel like so foolish afterwards, right? To the point where I started just more so like, learning the lesson of, okay, listen, because this person has authority, which is, valid and was given to them, through, real authority. And so they are looking out for you, but also it's like you're making, this is me speaking, but like making a fool out of myself by pushing against that. And I knew that I was going to be the first person to bring up Star Wars, so I'm just going to accept it. And I tried not to, but I was rewatching. I was also not shown as the entire shelf full of Star Wars products.
Just gonna get my lightsaber out for this. Okay.
Yeah, a little bit of product placement.
Yes.
He's ready in case I say something he doesn't agree with. He's gonna.
You are the Sith Lord we are looking for.
Hey, Han shot first, all right? We're all prepared. This is a very well. This is the part of the show where it goes downhill.
Okay.
All the audio's messed up too, so it's just like randomly everybody.
Yeah, they're gonna see that. They're gonna
we
s-
actually start
They're
talking
gonna see
about
that
it.
well before the conversation starts. They're just gonna be like, "What happened?" Oh man, this is
So, Star Wars reference.
right. Favorite moment of the day. Yeah, so I was recently rewatching The Last Jedi. Okay? So episode 8. And when I had first watched The Last Jedi, I was caught up in all the frustration over just like all of the chaos of the hatred that movie received. And over time I've come to appreciate it. But something that's still, and rightfully so, really aggravates me when I watch that movie, and I think this was clearly done with intent, but it really gets to me, is when Leia is incapacitated, and so Admiral Holdo takes control during this is like the worst possible time that somebody could be handed the reins, and Captain Poe decides that he, even though he's like a fighter pilot, he decides that he deserves to know the entirety of everything that Admiral Holdo is thinking of in her mind at the time. Like, what's our plan? What are we doing? You have to explain everything to me. And her holding genuine authority, she knows, like, okay, well, first off, he's problematic, and also I don't need to explain myself to you. It's your job, my job, to take care of everybody. Your job is to do what I tell you to. And him like taking it to the point as a character where, you know, he thinks, okay, this is my logic here. She won't tell me what her plan is. I don't understand where her decision making is coming from, so I need to use violence to force control into my own hands. And that, now that I've kind of calmed down about the rest of the movie, that part, like, that aggravates me so much watching it, because I've seen how hurtful that is. And during a time like this is a time where, you know, we have to respect the decision of our bishops and our parents and our government and all that. And we don't, like, as much as we want to understand where they're coming up with these decisions, we don't have the right to demand that.
I would also like to point out, and I think this is helpful to remember, you know, it's like, yes, we live in the world, but the church is not of the world. And that, you know, it's like St. Peter has two keys. Like, there's the secular authority and then the religious authority. Like, always and forever, the church understands her authority is higher than the secular authority. And so, like, matters of faith come before all else, right? And so, that I, as a priest, if my bishop told me to be contrary to the state, would have absolutely no problem doing that, right? So, like, you know, how much the bishop is trying to listen to authorities and you know, be prudent and have the best information to make his decisions, certainly I think is part of it. But at the end of the day, his authority exceeds the governor, the president, the UN, like, and I will back him up. But it's also like, that's the voice I also have to be obedient to.
So there is Right, and that hierarchy of authority.
Yeah.
Because I think I've heard you explain this before, and I've learned about it, but I think it's interesting, and you can stop me if I'm spouting heresy here, but that, you know, authority, there is like true like authority from God in government as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So that all authority, just like all fatherhood, would be a participation in the authority, the fatherhood of God. So it's like and St. Paul will talk about the charism of administration. It's like that's a working of the Holy Spirit. And so it's not just merely secular ideas we come up with, hey, let's make this thing called government, but that there is a necessary order to the world where there is the legitimate exercise of authority. But certainly we could take authority and use it contrary to God, as in any occasion of sin, like that we would take something that would have a good and proper place and we use it for something different than that. That's never any type of authority that we need to be necessarily obedient to, right? But the properly administered authority is one that we have to be to submit ourselves to.
Yeah. And sometimes discerning how properly administered that authority is can be a little bit difficult.
Right. Yes, and then, but it's also keeping in mind, it's like, well, what is the hierarchy of authority here? So like the hierarchy of religious authority over the state is a thing, but that's not necessarily in all matters. Right? And so like that there are places where these things intersect. But just like a right to life issue being more important than environmental issues or economy issues, matters of faith take more precedence over matters of life. Because what good is life without Christ? So if my religious freedom is compromised, well then, like this would actually take ask more of us over even right to life issues. And so, you know, it's like how this religious authority, I think the clearest case would be like the Pope speaking on matters infallibly, which be on faith and morals. Like, so that's where he's exercising this level of authority. It's like this is proper to like what he's been entrusted to, and he can speak with this absolute certainty and authority, and we can trust in it, even though we might not necessarily understand at the time. Whereas, like, say, other topics wouldn't necessarily be him exercising that level of authority, where that might actually fall to the state or something like that.
Yeah.
And so just because the Pope has a different idea or the bishop does, well, in a certain area wouldn't necessarily apply.
Mm-hmm.
But us celebrating the sacraments definitely falls to the bishop.
Nice throw. We're being passed a message in a bottle over here. So,
Interesting.
It's the location of the Ark of the Covenant is written on this piece of paper.
It's still like 30 seconds behind.
Yeah, so everybody's saying that it's fine on their end, so you can just go about business as usual with that. Okay, so how about one last question?
Sounds good.
To finish up here. And so I think us talking about the Dark Knight of the Soul got all of the Batman fans excited. Different night, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think about Batman when I think about that poem anyway, so I'm the same. So this question is actually addressed specifically to you, Father. What Christ-like qualities does Batman have,
Interesting.
according to Father Justin?
I need a little bit of time to think about this.
Yeah. So
This is not a simple question.
You think about that.
Yeah.
Do you want some time to think about that?
Well, let me start with,
Okay.
there's a difference between a dark night and desolation.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And these are very important distinctions to make. Whereas I think there is a lot of desolation in Batman. He's not necessarily in the Dark Knight, right? So that he's making a lot of decisions in desolation, but there's times where he flirts with the darkness, and because the Dark Knight is really realizing our nothingness. And I don't think Batman actually embodies that very, very well. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's definitely an advocate of the use of violence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are there any Christ-like qualities in Batman?
I think a lot of people take the whole, okay, Batman doesn't kill people thing, or like he refuses to use firearms, right?
Right.
So his intent
Non-lethal.
is non-lethal methods.
Yes.
And
But
so
still harm.
people like to, I guess, conflate that with some form of virtue. Of
That he has
pacifism.
a power that he could use that he doesn't, so that sometimes using restraint.
It's like Iron Man.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I think Iron Man's a little more Christ-like than Batman.
Well, yeah, I guess that depends on which. Well, also, okay. Let me counter. It depends on which iteration of these people we're talking about.
Of
and
course.
at what point in time.
Yes.
Because it can be said for almost any superhero, you're going to have the Christ-like sacrifice at some point, right? Or, approach it like you're
Yeah.
going to have some sharing in sacrificial love, usually.
I would say you're going to have a savior figure
Mm-hmm.
almost always.
Yeah.
But not necessarily sacrificial.
Okay, and so in the case of Batman,
Yes.
well, okay, this is a bad example too, because I'm thinking about The Dark Knight Rises, where he flies the bomb out of the city, right?
Right. And it's a farce.
It's a farce.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're
Jesus didn't really die. He didn't really raise from the
Yeah,
dead.
you're made to believe that he's there and that he's going to blow up.
Yeah.
And even if, I think it's implied that, so like mirroring this with Iron Man,
Yeah.
flying the bomb up
Through the portal.
through the portal.
He
right?
thought it was a one-way thing.
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you could maybe argue that in that moment Bruce Wayne thinks that he might not make it out of that.
He fixed the autopilot.
Okay, there's no argument then.
Yeah. He knew what he was about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that was fixed 2 weeks ago. Oh, okay.
And so, oh man. And so he was also using that as a means to an end to get rid of Batman because he was tired of that.
Yeah.
So it's also self-serving because he wanted to
Go out in a bang.
he wanted to go out and make Batman look good and
Yeah.
then also go out and enjoy his life as Bruce Wayne.
Right off in the sunset. And then be in some Paris cafe. Not even making eye contact with what's his name?
Alfred.
Alfred.
Yeah.
So I think what we can deduce from this conversation is Jesus and Batman, no, do not correlate. Okay.
Oh man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, anonymous
Sorry.
Batman fan.
Also DC, so.
Yeah.
Okay, but those movies are really good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
There's
of course. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not to say.
And Batman is usually depicted as a complicated character.
Mhm.
So that he's got a lot of mixed motives and a lot of
Yeah.
things going on. But then you get like DC again. Well, you got Superman.
Mhm.
It's like he almost never risks anything.
Mm-hmm.
You can quote me on that. Superman is the worst character ever.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
There you go.
I don't think there are a lot of Superman fans left. So I think that's fine to say.
Yeah.
You're not going to get too much hate mail. But he also the fact that he's just boring.
Because there's
What's-
never any drama.
Yeah. Well, the only drama comes from putting Lois Lane in danger.
Right. And like this is his only avenue that he can be hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he also has essentially infinite power, so, like,
So-
there's still no drama.
Yeah. Right. So, okay, this is bringing up so much. I just. I've also rewatched Hercules the other day.
Me too.
Did you really?
I did.
0 to hero,
So
just
good.
like that.
Yeah. I've
Um,
never seen it.
really,
Yeah.
it's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
I
you
recommend
should
it.
get on that.
Disney Plus has it. So.
Disney Plus, yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna spoil it right now. Sorry, I'm sure you don't mind.
I'm okay.
Came out 22 years ago, so I think the spoiler ban has been lifted.
I'll allow it.
Shout out to Hercules for being released on the year that I was born. That's how you know it's a good movie, right? There's your daily dose of pride. But in the movie, you have Hercules, and you have Hades trying to scheme against Zeus and everything, and so his only obstacle is Hercules standing in the way, who is very much a Superman Kal-El figure. He was separated from his father. He is godlike, really no weaknesses, and he's amongst the mortals, and so his only weakness, he starts falling in love, right? Kind of like your Lois Lane figure, and so just something that I found so weird. Like I remembered all that, whatever, and I'm rewatching it as an adult, and you get to the part where Hades makes a deal with
Meg.
Hercules.
Oh.
Well, he already has a pre-existing deal with Meg, so
Who's Meg?
Meg is the love
The-
interest.
Oh.
Megara.
Megara.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
Meg. Yeah, you'll get it eventually.
Yes.
But,
I think I was the target audience when this came out, and Hercules was a character I already liked, and I still didn't watch it.
Wow.
yeah, I mean, that's cool.
Heart of
But
Stone.
there's always time to change.
Yeah.
There's always, and so Hades convinces Hercules that Meg is in imminent danger, right? And so the deal is, I will not hurt Meg if you give up your powers for 24 hours. Okay.
Kind of rhymes.
Yeah, he gives it to him in the form of a poem. Not really, but I'm watching it, and Hercules like almost immediately agrees to this deal. Immediately drains him of his powers, and he's like, "Okay, good luck dealing with Meg. I'm gonna go destroy Mount Olympus." And of course, as part of his plan, like he puts Meg is still in imminent danger, and Hercules also has to save everything. But I'm thinking, why? So you have Meg. This is like the Superman thing, right? You talked about, okay, you can create drama by adding a love interest, but he's still limitlessly powerful. So that's really a non-issue,
Right.
because what does it matter? Hercules has spent this entire time doing the 12 trials or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that he can overcome just about any danger. And so his first thought, which doesn't make sense, if you're saying, okay, the woman you love is in danger, why would his answer not be, okay, I'll keep my powers and I'll just come over there and save her myself? Like, why? Why would he? How like, it doesn't make sense. Like, so if you're talking about Superman, or in that case Hercules, you have to dumb it down to a point where it's unbelievable
Right.
to even make any kind of conflict.
Right.
Yeah.
Disney's form of sacrificial love.
It's fake.
Cheap.
Cheap grace and fake love.
But once he was mortal, he was ready to sacrifice himself, so there's still something to be gained out of it. It's like the Iron Man situation, because he thought he was going to die.
Mm.
When he dives into the life-draining pool
Yeah.
to retrieve
He starts
her,
to become old.
he does believe that he will die. But it doesn't make sense, because he was stupid to begin with for even getting into that situation.
Yep.
You see.
Kid movies.
So his weakness is stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, Ruby says, I've honestly never analyzed Hercules so deeply, but these are valid points. And Josh says, I wish I could have phased into the room for that Batman discussion to be continued post-quarantine. Yeah.
Thanks.
Batman's a very fun character to watch. I mean, the
Yeah.
more human you make them,
Right?
the easier it is.
Right?
That's why like Iron Man and Captain America are so much more interesting.
Right.
They're so human.
And the biggest downfall for Batman, I'm also going to say this, is he's too wealthy. It's just like his infinite source is always technology. And so, like, whenever he's facing a problem, he's inventing new technology to be able to overcome it.
Would you say the same thing about Iron Man?
A little bit, yeah.
Behind
And
that
here
suit.
we are, using new technology to overcome
Mm.
Yeah.
ourselves.
Hypocrite
Because we
you.
don't like our poverty.
Mm-hmm. Without that suit, what are you?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fine by me because I'm Team Cap all the way. So, everybody had. It's okay. Iron Man got to the point where he was ready for that sacrificial love.
Yeah.
That's all that matters. It's the journey.
Right.
Yes.
Because there's also something to be said about like, okay, Captain America is not invincible, so there's a conflict there.
Right.
But from the beginning, he is almost limitlessly sacrificial.
Right.
Even before he gains his powers. So there's something that's not as interesting about his decision making, and I will say that.
He's very consistent as a
Mhm.
character.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's not as much growth, and
Right.
honestly, although the growth comes from him learning to be more ambiguous about his decision making.
Yeah.
Because you get into the post Civil War phase where he's like off the radar, and
Right.
now he's like, well, and after Hydra turns on him, and so whereas you go from self-serving, morally ambiguous to, virtuous, it's kind of like this A-type, extremely constrictingly consistent moral code to like, I'm going to get into more of like a little bit of a Batman area at some points. So, yeah. Good to know that superheroes can always create content for discussion.
we have not exhausted this topic.
Not at all.
No.
No. That's why I'm going to stop talking about the Marvel Civil War now. Heated debate.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Moral. Yeah.
You know when that shift happened? I can cite it in the movie. Is when Cap apologized for correcting Iron Man for cussing. It's like Iron Man cussed. Captain apologized.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of sense does that make?
You're realizing the hierarchy, the importance of things here.
Like, so in a sense it's certainly a venial sin, but Iron Man committed a sin. Captain America pointed it out, and then apologized for pointing it out,
Mm-hmm.
and then repented of his ways of
Righteousness.
Like, I'm sorry, I was too righteous. And from that point on, his character got a little more in the gray.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do, but also from like his perspective, trying to be the glue of a team
Yeah.
and the leader of a team, I think there is validity to the fact that there comes a point where you have to start weighing the gravity of these kinds of things. This is like especially when you're already sensing division amongst people, I think he had realized that grasping onto his strict attitude was only making things worse. That's not to say that appeasing sin is the right way to go about it, but you're also talking about a guy that was about to let his mind-controlled best friend kill him.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. and then he grew a beard. That's what really did it.
Mm.
That
The
drove.
beard.
That was the final nail. He said, "You know what? I'm not truly morally ambiguous until you can't see my face.
Mm.
I'm not gonna wear a mask. So I'm just gonna grow a beard out. And
Yeah.
grow my hair out really long so you can't see me."
I don't know, if God didn't want beards, why does he make it grow out of my face?
It's a really good question.
This is my question.
I don't know. I don't really have any experience to draw from, so I don't know.
Same.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yep.
it doesn't. You don't feel any call to the darkness from it though, right?
No, that is natural.
The Dark Knight, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Realize your nothingness. It's
Yeah.
like-
Yeah,
Hidden behind
everything is a gift, so just you receive it. Receive it as a gift.
All right. Now
Beautiful.
that we've done a literary analysis of facial hair, and also a little bit of psychoanalysis, I think that's a good stopping point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, big thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight to our first Bulls Night after party. We hope that you had a good time and that your questions were sufficiently answered. If not, next week, have those ready for us so that we can talk about it more. Yeah. And so, any closing remarks?
Thank you, Garrett, for organizing this and getting started.
Of course.
And most especially, special thanks to our technician who's behind the camera working.